Okay, I just almost finished doing this whole video and then I realized it hadn't been recording, so I'm doing this again. So let's hope this goes well this time. But anyways, in this video I want to talk about the much debated subject of what is goth? Like, is it a music genre? Is it fashion? Is it a lifestyle? Is it like what's inside your heart? Like, it seems like everybody has a different answer to this question, but for me personally, when I talk about goth, I'm specifically referring to the subculture that started in the late 1970s, early 80s, that sort of came about from post-punk music and evolved into gothic rock and dark wave, death rock, like all that sort of stuff. And I'm referring to both the music and the subculture that has spawned around it, because I think, yes, the music is the foundation of the subculture, and of course it's important, but I think the music alone doesn't make a subculture. A foundation alone isn't, a building. So the music by itself is just a music genre. It's everything else around it that makes it a subculture. And that's where things like the music and the literature and the lifestyle and all of that come in. And that can be different for everybody. And if you're somebody who considers yourself a goth and you only listen to the music but you're not into anything else like that, you're not into the fashion or the makeup or any like sort of lifestyle elements, then I think that's fine. I think it's fine if you just like the music, but I think there's a lot more to it than that for most people who consider themselves goth. And like, for me, I would consider things like my dark art to be part of my goth lifestyle, and things like my collection of taxidermy and bones I consider part of my goth lifestyle, as well as things like how I like to visit cemeteries sometime. I think that's all part of what I consider my goth lifestyle, but for somebody else it could be something completely different. Maybe they're really into like horror movies and that's part of the goth lifestyle for them. Maybe they're into like ghost stories and that's part of the goth lifestyle for them, or they really like gothic literature. There's so many different things and it can be different for everybody, but I think there's a lot more to the subculture than just the music. Now, while for me the music, I would say, is a very important part of what goth is, and when I talk about goth, I'm specifically referring to the subculture that arose from the music. I'm aware that for a lot of people, when they say goth, they're just talking about like a general sort of dark, alternative, sort of spooky sort of person or aesthetic. And I don't think that bothers me as much as it does a lot of goths. And I think the reason why is because I come from an area that doesn't have a huge goth scene. Like right now I live in a small town in Alabama, and I grew up in Arkansas, and both of those are very conservative places where you don't have a lot of other goths. I can count maybe like a dozen people that I've met in the entire like almost 2 decades of being a goth that I've met that have even like a surface level knowledge of what goth music even is. But I've met a lot more people who are just more generally alternative, who might call themselves goth, who don't listen to the music. And I think that's fine, because in my experience, people like that, I'll generally have more in common with them than I would the more conservative people that are most of the people around where I live. So even if they don't like the music, I'll probably have something else in common with them. Like maybe we watch the same movies or we have some of the same hobbies. I've heard people say before, like, oh, if I meet someone who says they're goth, but they just like goth fashion and they don't listen to the music, then what will I even have to talk to them about? Then I'll just say, you know, I like your outfit, and then there's nothing else to talk about, which I think is silly because there's so much more to talk about than just fashion and music. There's a whole world of other things to talk about. So I think just limiting who you're friends with based on what kind of music they listen to is kind of shallow. And when I'm friends with people, they're probably going to listen to the music that I listen to anyways. I'm probably going to introduce them to the music. There's so many people who I've met who would have never heard of goth music in their life, but through being friends with me, I listen to goth music with them and introduce them to something they never would have heard of before. Like, I can remember being back in high school and listening to London After Midnight under the bleachers with my partner at the time, and I remember being on the bus with a friend who wasn't even alternative, but we were listening to Bela Lugosi's Dead, and she was loving it. And like, I remember I used to have Clown by Switchblade Symphony auto-playing on my MySpace page back in the day, and I got a friend to be really into Switchblade Symphony, and like, these people probably wouldn't have ever heard of goth music if it hadn't been through being friends with me. But if I had approached them and had automatically been like, ew, you don't listen to goth music, you're a poser, like, they probably would have never even listened to goth music. So I don't think that approach is necessarily the best way to like spread goth music, because I love goth music and I want people to listen to it, but I don't think being like a bitch about it is necessarily the best way to support goth music. I think, you know, being nice to people and sharing your music with them is a much better way to spread the love of goth music to other people. Now, even if a person listens to goth music and they still don't like it, you know, I'm still willing to be friends with them, because there's so much more to a person than just what music they listen to. So I think the goth music is important for me specifically. It doesn't like stop me from being able to enjoy the music if somebody else wants to call themselves a goth, but they're not necessarily into the music. So I don't care if somebody else wants to call themselves a goth and not listen to the music as much as a lot of other goths do. The only times it does bother me when people who I wouldn't necessarily consider a goth call themselves a goth are like, these days I see a lot more like conservative people calling themselves goth, which like when I was growing up was completely unheard of. Like, the conservatives were the people that were calling us like devil worshippers and saying that we were like evil, and like honestly I kind of preferred that to these days when like right-wing people call themselves a goth. I prefer them to just hate us than to try to beat us, to be honest. But sometimes these days I even see like homophobic people being goths, and like I think that's so ridiculous, because this subculture was started by LGBT people and it's always been a safe space for queer people. Like, Susie Sue is bisexual, and Roz Williams was a gay man, and like he would perform in full drag, and there's always been a lot of androgyny and gender bending looks within goth, and there's always been tons of queer people who are goths. So to now have like these homophobic goths, I think is kind of ridiculous. I would much rather be friends with somebody who doesn't listen to the music and calls themselves a goth than somebody who is a bigot or a homophobe or a racist or transphobic or sexist or any of those things and calls themselves a goth. because to me my values are so much more important than just like the music that I listen to. Another thing that bothers me is when people like will fetishize goths, or like the whole big titty goth GF thing. It really bothers me because so many people will fetishize goths or like cater to that fetish on OnlyFans, even though they have no real interest in goth whatsoever. They're just portraying a fantasy, and that is the reason why I've had guys come up to me and start talking to me about BDSM before they even ask me what my name is, or like people sending me pervy DMs on different websites and like all kinds of creepy interactions that I don't necessarily want to be in, because like I don't dress the way I dress to fulfill somebody's fetish. I do this because I love it, and I would much rather be considered like beautiful, like a work of art, than sexy, like something you want to fuck. And I know there has been a connection between goth and BDSM, or like fetish wear in general, since like the beginning, and like a lot of goth fashion is inspired by like fetish fashion, and a lot of goths are into BDSM, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm not trying to slut shame anybody, and I'm not trying to say like sex work isn't valid. It's just when people who are completely outside of the subculture and aren't interested in it at all are fetishizing goth and creating this like fictional fantasy version of what a goth girl is, and like then people try to project that onto real life goth girls in a way that we don't want. That's what bothers me. And the last thing that bothers me is when articles will misrepresent goth, like things that people should have researched before they published it, like whether it's articles that say that like goth is satanic and violent and evil, or like just articles that victim inaccurate comments about like what goth music is, like if they'll call something like Korn goth music, or like if Kim Kardashian decided to wear a black dress today, and so the article has to be like, Kim Kardashian is a goth goddess. Like, that always irritates me. I wish like they would do like even the most surface level research of what goth is before they write these stupid articles and spread this misinformation. I think that's so annoying. But in general, it doesn't really bother me if somebody calls themselves a goth and doesn't listen to the music. I think all that matters is if you're doing what is true to yourself, if this is what you genuinely like, if this is what feels right to you, this is what feels like how you feel on the inside, you know, you can dress like a goth without listening to the music, and I think that's fine. I don't necessarily think I would call you a goth, but if you're calling yourself a goth, I'm not gonna like try to argue with you, because I just don't care that much. I think there's so much more important shit out there than like who gets to call themselves a goth. I think as long as you're a good person and you're not like some kind of bigot, then it's fine. Just you do you, just be true to yourself, and it's all good. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. I guess now just check out today's outfit.
This is the voice you have learned to fear. This is the voice of terror.
Drifts up through a dark get bright.